A flight attendant, blinded by her own prejudice, throws away a young black girl's simple backpack. She has no idea the private jet she's on was chartered specifically for this girl and her world-changing project. What unfolds is a cascade of irreversible karma, a story of quiet brilliance against loud ignorance. The flight attendant thought she was just putting trash in its place, but she was about to discover she had thrown her entire life away. We have the real story, the fallout, and the names you won't believe. Stick with us as we uncover what happens when you underestimate the wrong person. The air in the exclusive terminal at Van Nuys Airport hummed with a different kind of energy. It was a low, powerful thrum of wealth and influence, a world away from the chaotic terminals of LAX that Zola Adebayo was used to. At 17, Zola was a prodigy, though she'd be the last to use that word. She saw herself as a scientist, a problem solver, someone who looked at the dying coral reefs and the smog-choked skies, and felt a responsibility to act. And act she had. Her creation, Project Evergreen, was a revolutionary bioremediation system. It was a complex, elegant solution using genetically modified algae to break down microplastics in water at an astonishing rate. It wasn't just theory. It was a working prototype small enough to be housed in a series of interconnected cylinders, all of which were nestled safely inside her unassuming, durable black backpack. This project was her ticket to the Global Youth Innovators Summit in Geneva, a gathering of the brightest young minds on the planet. More than that, it was her hope for the future, a tangible piece of her soul. Walking beside her were her two teammates, Ben Carter and Maya Singh. Ben, a lanky coding genius with a perpetually worried expression, was responsible for the intricate monitoring software. Maya, a sharp and pragmatic chemistry whiz, had perfected the nutrient solution that kept the algae alive and thriving. They were a trio of self-professed nerds, bound by a shared passion and countless late nights in the school lab. "I can't believe Mr. Harrison actually pulled this off," Maya whispered, her eyes wide as she stared at a sleek Gulfstream GE650 being prepped on the tarmac. A private jet. For us, he said it was crucial we arrive rested and with the project secure. Zola replied, a small smile touching her lips. She adjusted the straps of her backpack, the familiar weight a comfort. Inside, nestled amongst the custom-molded foam padding, was her life's work. No baggage handlers, no risk of it getting lost or damaged. Their benefactor, Mr. David Harrison, was a tech philanthropist who had taken a keen interest in Zola's work after she'd won the National Science Fair. He was a quiet, almost reclusive man who believed in empowering the next generation. He had arranged everything from the funding for their research to this incredible once-in-a-lifetime journey. He was meeting them at the airport, having been delayed in a meeting, but had insisted they board ahead of him to get settled. As they approached the jet, the door opened and a flight attendant appeared at the top of the stairs. She was a woman in her late 40s with meticulously styled blonde hair and a smile that was technically perfect, but didn't quite reach her sharp, assessing blue eyes. Her name tag read Brenda Walsh. She had been with Apex Air, the charter company, for over 2 decades, and in her mind, she was the gatekeeper of this exclusive world. She prided herself on being able to spot new money, or in her less charitable moments, those who simply didn't belong. Brenda's smile tightened almost imperceptibly as the 3 teenagers approached. They didn't look like the usual clientele. There were no designer logos, no air of inherited entitlement. Just 3 kids in comfortable travel clothes, looking more like they were heading on a school trip than a private intercontinental flight. Her eyes, however, lingered on Zola. It was a fleeting glance, but it was laden with a lifetime of preconceived notions. "Welcome aboard," Brenda said, her voice smooth but cool. "May I see your boarding information?" Maya, ever organized, presented the charter confirmation on her phone. Brenda glanced at it, her perfectly manicured finger tracing the details. "The Harrison Foundation," she murmured, a flicker of recognition in her eyes. The name meant money. Serious money. But her gaze drifted back to Zola, to her simple jeans, her hoodie, and the worn backpack slung over her shoulder. The pieces weren't fitting together in Brenda's carefully curated worldview. "Right this way," she said, her tone a fraction too bright. She turned and led them into the cabin, a space of cream leather and polished mahogany that smelled faintly of success. The opulence was breathtaking. Ben let out a low whistle while Maya's jaw was practically on the floor. Zola, however, was focused on one thing, finding a safe place for her backpack. She knew from Mr. Harrison's instructions that there was a secure forward closet specifically designated for sensitive equipment. "Excuse me," Zola said politely, approaching Brenda, who was now standing by the galley. "Could you show me where the secure storage is? I have some delicate research equipment in my bag." Brenda turned, her professional smile plastered on, but her eyes did a slow, deliberate scan of Zola's backpack. It was a standard, sturdy bag, the kind you'd see on any college campus. There were a few scuff marks on the bottom, and a keychain with a small beaded lizard her little sister had made for her. To Brenda, it looked cheap. It looked out of place. It looked to her like clutter. "All carry-on items can be placed in the overhead compartments," Brenda stated, her voice losing its feigned warmth and taking on a crisp, dismissive edge. "I understand," Zola said, her voice steady, despite the prickle of unease. "But this is my entire project. It's very fragile." Mr. Harrison's assistant confirmed there was a designated closet for it. The mention of the name Harrison should have been a warning, but Brenda's prejudice was a fog that clouded her judgment. She saw a young black girl dressed simply, questioning her authority on her aircraft. It was a challenge she felt compelled to meet. "I am the senior flight attendant on this aircraft, miss," Brenda said, her voice dropping to a low, condescending tone. "I am perfectly aware of the storage compartments." "That," she said, gesturing dismissively towards Zola's bag with a flick of her wrist, "can go overhead, or I can take it and stow it for you." The offer was laced with an unspoken threat. There was a finality in her tone, a clear signal that the conversation was over. Ben and Maya exchanged a nervous glance. They had seen this kind of subtle dismissive behavior directed at Zola before, but never in a situation with such high stakes. Zola clutched her backpack a little tighter. Every instinct screamed at her not to let it go. "With all due respect, I'd feel much more comfortable keeping it with me until I can place it in the secure locker myself. It's irreplaceable." Brenda's patience, already thin, snapped. "We have a schedule to keep. We can't delay departure while we debate the sentimental value of your luggage." The way she said luggage was an insult, stripping the backpack of its importance, reducing it to a mere inconvenience. A knot of anxiety tightened in Zola's stomach. This was going wrong, terribly wrong. This woman wasn't listening. She wasn't seeing a scientist. She was seeing a problem. And in that moment, Zola made a decision. She would stand her ground. This was too important. "I'm not debating," Zola said, her voice quiet but firm, imbued with the authority of someone who knew the true value of what she carried. "I'm stating a fact. My project needs to be secured properly. I will wait for Mr. Harrison to arrive if necessary. The challenge was now explicit. Brenda's face, a mask of professional courtesy just moments before, hardened into a granite slab of fury. How dare this girl? On her plane, in front of the other crew, the injustice in her mind was monumental, and the object of her fury became the simple black backpack, the symbol of everything that felt wrong and out of place in her world. It was a symbol she was about to remove. The tension in the cabin was thick enough to taste. It clung to the plush leather seats and muted the soft hum of the jet's auxiliary power unit. Ben and Maya stood frozen, uncertain of their role in this escalating standoff. They were guests in a world they didn't understand, and Brenda Walsh was its unyielding warden. Zola stood her ground, her knuckles white where she gripped the straps of her backpack. It was an anchor in the swirling current of the flight attendant's hostility. She had faced down skeptical judges and condescending professors, but this was different. This wasn't a critique of her science. It was a dismissal of her personhood. Waiting for Mr. Harrison is not an option. Brenda snapped, her voice now sharp and brittle. We are on a strict timetable. The pilots have their flight plan filed. We push back in 10 minutes, with or without Mr. Harrison on board. Now give me the bag. She didn't frame it as a request. It was a command, underpinned by years of unchallenged authority over her domain. She took a step closer, her presence looming and insistent. Zola involuntarily took a step back, bumping into one of the buttery soft leather seats. No, Zola said, her voice trembling slightly but laced with steel. I can't. Everything is in here. The prototype, the data drives, my research notes. It's not just a bag. I have had quite enough of this, Brenda declared, her face flushing a blotchy red. She saw defiance where Zola felt desperation. She saw insolence where Zola was trying to protect her future. To Brenda, this wasn't about a fragile project. It was about a young woman who didn't know her place. The backpack was the nexus of the conflict, a scuffed, ordinary symbol of everything Brenda found offensive. She made her move with a swiftness that caught everyone off guard. She didn't try to wrench the bag from Zola's shoulder. Her attack was more insidious, more contemptuous. With a disdainful tisk of annoyance, Brenda reached out not for the straps but for the bag itself. Her fingers adorned with a large, gaudy sapphire ring curled around the top handle. We do not have time for teenage theatrics, she sneered. And with a flick of her wrist, a gesture of pure, unadulterated dismissal, she unhooked the bag from Zola's grasp. The movement was so sudden, so shockingly casual, that Zola didn't even have time to react. The weight she had been holding on to for dear life was suddenly gone. For a moment, she thought Brenda would march it to the forward closet as requested. A flicker of relief was instantly extinguished by what happened next. Brenda didn't walk toward the cockpit. She didn't even turn toward the overhead bins. Instead, she pivoted on her heel toward the galley. Next to the gleaming coffee machine and the neatly stacked crystal glasses was a waste disposal chute, a small, discreet silver door designed for the efficient removal of trash during flight. It led directly to an exterior access refuse container emptied by the ground crew after every flight. In Brenda's mind, that's what the backpack was: trash. Clutter, an unsightly object marring the perfection of her cabin. With a look of supreme self-satisfaction, she held the backpack over the chute. Brenda, no. The voice came from the back of the plane. It was the junior flight attendant, a young woman named Sarah, who had been quietly observing the exchange with growing horror. But it was too late. The world seemed to slow down for Zola. She saw the contempt in Brenda's eyes, the triumphant smirk on her lips. She saw her life's work, her hope, her future dangling over a garbage chute. "Please don't!" Zola cried out, lunging forward. But Brenda was faster. With a final contemptuous shove, she pushed the black backpack into the opening. The silver door swung shut with a soft metallic click. It was a sound that echoed in the silent cabin like a gunshot, a sound that signified the obliteration of Zola's dream. The bag was gone. For a full 5 seconds, nobody moved. The only sound was the faint electronic hum of the aircraft. Ben stood with his mouth agape, his face a mask of disbelief. Maya let out a small, strangled gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. Sarah, the junior flight attendant, looked pale and sick. Zola just stood there, her hands still outstretched, grasping at the empty air where her project had been. Her mind couldn't process it. The shock was a physical blow knocking the air from her lungs. The intricate network of cylinders, the living algae, the culmination of 2 years of relentless work, all of it gone. Discarded like a used napkin, thrown away. Brenda Walsh, however, looked entirely pleased with herself. She dusted off her hands in a gesture of finality and turned back to Zola, her expression one of stern victory. "Now then," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Find your seat. We need to prepare for departure." She had restored order. She had put the impertinent girl in her place. She had, in her twisted view of the world, cleaned up a mess. She had no inkling, not the slightest suspicion that she had just detonated a bomb in the middle of her own life. The fallout was coming, and it would be far more devastating than she could ever imagine. The click of that trash chute door was not an ending. It was the beginning of her own destruction. The immediate aftermath was a vacuum of sound and motion. Zola remained frozen, her gaze fixed on the small silver door of the waste chute. It was a portal to a void, a sleek, unassuming feature of the luxury cabin that had just swallowed her entire world. The polished surface reflected her own horrified face, distorted and distant. Her mind replayed the image in a sickening loop. Brenda's sneer, the casual flick of her wrist, the finality of the disappearing bag. Then the shock began to recede, replaced by a tidal wave of panic. "My project," she whispered the words barely audible. Then louder, her voice cracking with desperation. "My project. You threw away my project." She lunged toward the galley, her hands scrambling at the smooth, featureless chute door. There was no handle, no latch, no way to open it from the inside. It was designed to be a one-way trip. "Get it back," she cried, her voice rising to a frantic pitch. She turned on Brenda, her eyes blazing with a mixture of disbelief and fury. "You have to get it back. Now." Brenda, however, was unmoved. She crossed her arms, adopting the posture of a headmistress dealing with a hysterical child. "Calm yourself, miss. What's done is done. It was an unauthorized item, and I disposed of it. You were causing a scene and delaying our flight." "A scene?" Ben's voice, usually quiet and hesitant, boomed through the cabin. He had found his feet and his anger. "She told you how important it was." "We all did. That wasn't just a bag, that was 2 years of work. Our entire reason for being on this flight." Maya, recovering from her initial shock, rushed to Zola's side, putting a comforting arm around her shaking shoulders. "You can't just throw people's property away," she exclaimed, her voice sharp with outrage. "That's not just unprofessional, it's illegal." The accusation hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. But Brenda had been in this industry for 20 years. She had weathered complaints from entitled billionaires and temperamental celebrities. She was an expert at deflecting, diminishing, and seizing control of the narrative. "I will not be lectured on procedure by children," she said, her voice like ice. The item was unstowed and posed a potential hazard during takeoff. My decision was final, and in the interest of safety. She was already constructing the lie, the official version of events, that would paint her as the responsible professional, and Zola as the unruly passenger. The conflict had drawn the attention of the second crew member, Sarah, the junior flight attendant, who had cried out, "No," a moment too late. She was a young woman in her early 20s, only 6 months into her dream job. She idolized the glamour and professionalism that Brenda seemed to embody. But what she had just witnessed turned her stomach. She saw the truth. It wasn't about safety. It was an act of pure malice. Her eyes met Zola's for a fleeting second. In that glance, Zola saw a flicker of sympathy, of horror, of indecision. Here was a witness. Here was someone who knew. "You saw what she did," Zola pleaded, her voice dropping, taking on a desperate, reasoning tone. She pointed a trembling finger at Sarah. Tell her to get it back." Sarah opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. Brenda shot her a look. It was a glance of pure, unadulterated warning. It was a look that said, "You are new here. You are replaceable. Your career is in my hands. Say nothing?" The message was as clear as if it had been shouted. Sarah's face paled. She looked from Brenda's granite-hard expression to Zola's desperate, pleading eyes. Fear won. She dropped her gaze to the plush carpeting, her shoulders slumping in defeat. She mumbled, "All passengers need to be seated for takeoff." The words were automatic, a line from a script devoid of any conviction. She turned and quickly busied herself with checking the window shades, her back to the confrontation. Her silence was a second, sharper betrayal. It was a confirmation that in this gilded cage, the rules were different. Truth was secondary to hierarchy. Zola felt a profound sense of hopelessness wash over her. No one would help. They were trapped at 30,000 feet, with a woman who held all the power and had just wielded it with casual cruelty. Zola sank into the nearest seat, the fight draining out of her. The tears that she had been holding back began to well in her eyes. It was all gone. The delicate algae probably already crushed. The data drives her only backup of the raw experimental data were nestled in that bag. The custom-built prototype irreplaceable without thousands of dollars and months of work. Gone. Thrown away by a woman who hadn't even bothered to look inside. Brenda, seeing Zola's tears, saw capitulation. She gave a curt, satisfied nod. Good. Now if there are no more outbursts, we can get underway. She turned to walk toward the cockpit to inform the pilots they were ready for pushback. She felt a surge of triumph. She had faced a challenge to her authority and had won unequivocally. The cabin was quiet, the troublemaker subdued. Order was restored. As she passed down the aisle, she failed to notice the small red light blinking on Ben's laptop, which he had quickly and quietly opened on the seat beside him. Over the past year, Ben had been working on a side project, a custom app that activated his computer's microphone and camera with a voice command, streaming the encrypted feed to a private cloud server. It was something he'd designed for their lab sessions to ensure they never missed a key insight or breakthrough. When Brenda had first confronted Zola, Ben, sensing trouble, had muttered his activation phrase, "Chronicle session." He had captured everything. Brenda's condescending tone, Zola's calm, desperate pleas, the clear, undeniable malice of the act itself, and most damningly, Sarah's terrified silence. He didn't know yet what he would do with it. but in the crushing despair of the moment, it was a tiny digital ember of hope. They weren't as powerless as Brenda believed. The truth hadn't been thrown away with the backpack. It had been recorded. Brenda Walsh was just informing the cockpit that the cabin was secure for takeoff when the jet's main door, which she had sealed moments before, hissed open. A blast of warm California air and the distant whine of another jet's engines filled the quiet cabin. Framed in the doorway was a man in his early 60s, dressed in a simple but impeccably tailored grey suit. He had a kind, weary face, sharp, intelligent eyes, and an air of quiet authority that needed no introduction. It was David Harrison. "My apologies for the delay," he said, his voice calm and resonant as he stepped aboard. "A last-minute call I couldn't avoid." He paused, his keen eyes immediately sensing the funereal atmosphere in the cabin. He saw Ben, staring intently at his laptop, Maya, with her arm protectively around Zola, and Zola herself, her face streaked with tears, staring blankly at the seat in front of her. His brow furrowed with concern. "Zola, what's wrong? What's happened?" he asked, walking quickly toward them. Before anyone could answer, Brenda intercepted him. Her professional smile was back a perfect gleaming facade. "Mr. Harrison, welcome aboard. We've had a small issue with one of our younger passengers being a bit emotional about the flight, but everything is under control now. Please take your seat so we can depart." She tried to gently guide him toward the front of the cabin away from the students. It was a fatal miscalculation. David Harrison was not a man to be guided or managed. His focus was entirely on the distraught young woman he considered one of the most brilliant minds he had ever encountered. "Emotional," he repeated, his voice losing its warmth. He looked directly at Zola. "Zola, talk to me." Zola looked up, and the sight of her mentor, her champion, broke the dam of her composure. A fresh wave of sobs shook her. "She threw it away," Zola choked out, pointing a trembling finger toward the galley. "My project, my backpack. She threw it in the trash chute." Mr. Harrison's face went through a rapid series of emotions. Confusion, then disbelief, then a cold, hardening fury. He slowly turned his head and stared at Brenda. It was a look that could have frozen fire. The air in the cabin crackled. "You did what?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Brenda's smile faltered. For the first time, a sliver of unease pierced her armor of self-assurance. She had assumed the three teenagers were merely guests, perhaps winners of some charity contest. She had not made the connection that this man, the man who had chartered this $500,000 flight, was with them. "Sir," she began, her voice losing its crispness. The passenger was bringing an unauthorized, oversized bag into the cabin. It was a safety issue. She refused to stow it and Her backpack, Harrison interrupted, his voice rising. The black backpack with the beaded lizard keychain. Brenda paled. How could he know such a specific, insignificant detail? Why, yes, it was that simple backpack, as you call it, contains a prototype for a bioremediation system that could solve the global microplastics crisis. Harrison said, his voice now echoing with barely controlled rage. Its contents are insured for a value that exceeds your annual salary by a factor of 10. I chartered this specific aircraft with its specific cargo hold accommodations for the sole purpose of transporting that bag and the 3 young scientists who created it to the Global Innovators Summit in Geneva. He took a step closer to her, his quiet demeanor completely gone, replaced by an aura of immense power and indignation. This jet, Miss Walsh. This entire plane. It wasn't chartered for me, it was chartered for her. He pointed directly at Zola. The words hit Brenda Walsh with the force of a physical blow. The world tilted on its axis. Her mind, so quick to judge and categorize, struggled to reassemble the facts. The cheap clothes, the scuffed backpack, the black girl, and the multi-millionaire philanthropist declaring that this entire opulent world of private aviation had been arranged for her. It was impossible. It defied the natural order of things as Brenda understood it. Her face, which had been flushed with righteous anger, drained of all color. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The lie she had been constructing in her head about safety procedures crumbled to dust. There was no procedure that justified what she had done. She hadn't been enforcing rules. She had been acting on a petty, ugly prejudice, and she had done so in front of the one person who could make her pay the ultimate price. You threw a multi-million-dollar prototype into the garbage, Mr. Harrison's voice was now laced with a chilling, incredulous calm. He looked past her at the innocuous silver chute. Get it back. Brenda stared at him, her blue eyes wide with dawning horror. I can't, she stammered. It's a sealed refuse container. It can only be opened by the ground crew, from the outside. Then get the ground crew, Harrison commanded. Tell the pilot not to move this plane 1 inch. Tell him to get his people out here, right now, and open that container. You have 60 seconds to make that happen, or I will not only ensure that you never work on another aircraft again, I will personally fund the lawsuit that takes your house, your pension, and everything you have ever owned. The threat was not idle hyperbole. It was a promise delivered with the cold precision of a surgeon. The facade of the powerful, experienced flight attendant shattered completely. In its place was a terrified woman who was just beginning to comprehend the magnitude of her mistake. She had tossed away a backpack. She had thrown away her life. With a strangled sob, Brenda turned and practically ran toward the cockpit. Her carefully composed world collapsing around her with every step. The silence she left in her wake was profound, broken only by Zola's quiet, shuddering breaths. The power dynamic in the cabin had been utterly and irrevocably reversed. The door to the cockpit opened, and a man in a crisp white pilot's uniform stepped out. This was Captain Evan Miller, a veteran with 30 years of flying experience and the calm, steady demeanor that came with it. He had been informed by a babbling, nearly incoherent Brenda that there was a major issue in the cabin involving Mr. Harrison. He had expected a passenger dispute, perhaps a medical issue. He was not prepared for the scene that greeted him. David Harrison stood like a statue of cold fury. The 3 teenagers looked shell-shocked, and Brenda Walsh was visibly trembling, her face a mess of running mascara and stark terror. Mr. Harrison, Captain Miller began, his voice a calm baritone. My flight attendant informed me there's a problem. What's going on? Mr. Harrison's gaze was unwavering. Your senior flight attendant, Captain, took it upon herself to dispose of my guest's research prototype by throwing it into the aircraft's waste disposal. Captain Miller's eyebrows shot up. He looked from Harrison to Brenda, then to the waste chute and back. She did what? The question was quiet, but it carried the weight of utter disbelief. This was not a scenario covered in any training manual. It was so far outside the bounds of professional conduct as to be almost laughable were it not for the gravity of the situation. I need that container opened, now, Harrison stated. Of course, Captain Miller said, instantly pulling out his radio. He was already speaking to the ground crew supervisor. His language clipped and professional, but the urgency was unmistakable. This is Apex 650 at Stand 9. We have an emergency situation. I need a maintenance team at the aft service panel immediately. We need the exterior refuse container opened. Priority 1. While the captain was on the radio, a new figure emerged from the jet bridge. He was a man in a sharp suit, his face etched with concern, holding a tablet. He was Robert Peterson, the FBO fixed base operator manager for Apex Air, the man responsible for the entire ground operation and client experience. He had been alerted that the Harrison charter was delayed and had come to investigate personally. "Mr. Harrison, Captain Miller, is there a problem?" Peterson asked, his eyes quickly assessing the tense cabin. Harrison turned his icy gaze on the manager. "Your employee, Brenda Walsh, has destroyed a priceless piece of scientific equipment belonging to my guest, Ms. Adebayo." He gestured toward Zola. "I trust Apex Air will take full and immediate responsibility for this." Peterson's professional smile vanished. He looked at Brenda, who seemed to shrink under his gaze. This was a catastrophe. The Harrison Foundation was one of their most important accounts. A complaint from David Harrison could have devastating financial repercussions for the company. "Ms. Walsh," Peterson said, his voice dangerously low, "step into the forward galley with me, now." He led the trembling flight attendant away out of earshot of the passengers, but in full view of the cockpit and the junior flight attendant, Sarah, who was still trying to make herself invisible at the back of the plane. The conversation was quiet, but its intensity was palpable. Peterson's face was a mask of controlled fury. Brenda's was a torrent of desperate excuses. It was a safety issue. She was being unruly. I thought it was just a student's backpack. Peterson held up a hand, silencing her. "Brenda, I don't care if you thought it was a bag of rocks. You threw a passenger's property into the trash. There is no protocol, no rule, no possible justification for that action. Ever." He swiped a finger across his tablet, his expression grim. "I'm looking at your file, Brenda. This isn't the first time, is it?" This was the twist that would seal her fate. Brenda's heart plummeted. "There have been minor passenger complaints," she stammered. "Minor?" Peterson scoffed, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Let's see. 3 years ago, a formal complaint from a family from Dubai. You made condescending remarks about their traditional attire and lost a gift bag containing a valuable watch. The company settled out of court. 2 years ago, a warning on your record for inappropriate and discriminatory language toward a Nigerian businessman and his family. Last year, another complaint, this one from a well-known musician's entourage, alleging you were hostile and unaccommodating to his background singers. There's a pattern here, Brenda. A pattern of you deciding who belongs in this cabin and who doesn't." Each word was a nail in the coffin of her career. These weren't just minor incidents. They were a documented history of prejudice and abuse of authority. She had always managed to talk her way out of them, to frame them as misunderstandings or exaggerations. But now, in the glaring light of this catastrophic error, those past complaints formed a damning mosaic of her character. Brenda had no defense. The evidence was right there on the screen of her manager's tablet. Apex Air has a zero-tolerance policy for this kind of behavior, Peterson said, his voice flat and final. You are a liability we can no longer afford. As of this moment, you are suspended pending a full investigation, which I assure you will be swift and conclusive. A security escort will meet you on the tarmac. You will not be flying today, or ever again with this airline. He turned away from her, his decision made. Brenda stood alone in the galley, the world she had so carefully constructed, the status she had so fiercely protected completely and utterly gone. The sounds from outside grew louder, the rumble of a service vehicle, the shouts of the ground crew. They were coming to retrieve the backpack. They were also coming for her. Captain Miller finished his call and approached Mr. Harrison. "The crew is here. They're opening the container now. And Mr. Peterson has assured me that Ms. Walsh's employment is being terminated." Harrison gave a curt nod. His attention was not on the disgraced flight attendant, but on Zola. He walked over and knelt beside her seat. "They're getting it back, Zola," he said softly. "It's going to be okay." Just then, a ground crew member appeared at the door, holding the scuffed black backpack. It was a little compressed, but it was intact. He handed it carefully to Mr. Harrison, who in turn passed it to Zola. Zola clutched it to her chest, a wave of profound relief washing over her. She unzipped the main compartment with trembling fingers. Inside, the custom foam was slightly dented, but the interconnected cylinders that housed Project Evergreen were unbroken. The delicate ecosystem of algae, her hope for the future, was safe. As Zola cradled her project, 2 airport security officers stepped onto the plane. They walked past her, their faces impassive, and stopped in front of Brenda. "Ma'am," one of them said, his voice polite but firm. "Will you come with us, please?" Brenda Walsh, the once imperious queen of the cabin, looked small and broken. Without a word, she allowed them to escort her off the plane, past the sympathetic gaze of Captain Miller, past the cold stare of her manager, and past the young woman whose life she had tried to discard along with her backpack. She didn't look back. There was nothing left for her to look back at. For Brenda Walsh, being escorted off the Gulf Stream was only the first step in a long, brutal fall. The insulated world of private aviation, which had protected her for 2 decades, had now turned on her with merciless efficiency. The karma she had sown through years of petty cruelties and unchecked prejudice was coming back to her, not as a gentle rain, but as a catastrophic hurricane. The swift and conclusive investigation promised by Robert Peterson was exactly that. Ben Carter, at Mr. Harrison's urging, provided the audio and video file from his laptop. It was irrefutable. The recording captured every condescending word, the sheer malice of her actions, and the terrified silence of the junior attendant, Sarah. It was an open and shut case. Within 48 hours, Brenda's suspension became a termination for gross misconduct. Her 2 decades of service, her pension, her flight benefits, all were forfeited. But David Harrison was not finished. His promise in the cabin had not been an idle threat. He was a man who understood that true change required more than just a single firing. It required a systemic shock. His legal team, a phalanx of the sharpest corporate lawyers in Los Angeles, descended upon Apex Air. They didn't just file a complaint, they initiated a multi-pronged legal assault. The first lawsuit was on behalf of Zola Adebayo for emotional distress and the attempted destruction of intellectual property. The value of Project Evergreen was not just its insurance number, but its potential future value, which Harrison's experts estimated in the hundreds of millions. The second was a broader action against Apex Air, citing a pattern of discriminatory behavior by their staff using Brenda's documented history as the spearhead. The news broke on a niche aviation industry blog before going mainstream. Apex Air flight attendant fired after throwing away teen prodigy's multi-million-dollar science project. The story was too good to pass up a tale of prejudice power and a dramatic reversal of fortune. Zola's name was initially kept private, but the details of the incident, including Brenda Walsh's name, were leaked. Brenda found herself at the center of a firestorm. Her photo, a smiling corporate headshot from the Apex Air website was suddenly everywhere. She became a meme, a symbol of entitled arrogance, what the internet gleefully dubbed a private jet Karen. The comments sections were a brutal torrent of digital vitriol. Her phone rang incessantly with calls from reporters. Her quiet suburban life in Orange County was shattered. The legal battle was a humiliation. Apex Air facing a public relations nightmare, and the wrath of a billionaire client quickly moved to settle. The settlement for Zola was substantial, placed into a trust managed by Harrison for her education and the future development of Project Evergreen. The larger settlement with Harrison's foundation forced Apex Air into a company-wide overhaul. They implemented mandatory intensive anti-bias and de-escalation training for all staff from pilots to ground crew. They revamped their complaint investigation process, and Robert Peterson himself issued a public apology. The junior flight attendant, Sarah, was required to attend a rigorous retraining program, but was ultimately allowed to keep her job, a decision Harrison quietly supported, believing she was a victim of a toxic workplace culture. For Brenda, however, there was no recovery. The financial settlement from the airline did not protect her personally. Harrison's lawyers, as promised, filed a separate civil suit directly against her. They argued that her actions were so far outside the scope of her employment that she was personally liable. Faced with financial ruin, she was forced to settle a process that drained her savings and forced her to sell the home she had been so proud of. Her career was over. The aviation industry is a surprisingly small world. The story of what happened on the Harrison charter became a cautionary tale whispered about in crew lounges from Teterboro to Dubai. No commercial airline, let alone a private charter company, would touch her. She was blacklisted a pariah. The hard karma, however, went deeper than her finances or career. It struck at the very core of her identity. Brenda had built her self-worth on the foundation of her job. She was the senior flight attendant, the gatekeeper of an exclusive club. She drew her power from looking down on others. Now, she was the one being looked down upon. She took a job as a cashier at a high-end grocery store in a neighboring town, a place where she hoped no one would recognize her. But one afternoon, a woman in the checkout line stared at her. Her brow furrowed in recognition. "Don't I know you from somewhere?" the woman asked. "You're that flight attendant from the news, aren't you?" The shame was a physical burning thing. It was in that moment, under the harsh fluorescent lights of the grocery store, surrounded by the mundane reality of her new life, that the full weight of her actions crashed down. She hadn't just thrown away a backpack. She had thrown away her pride, her security, and her future, all for a fleeting moment of cruel, misguided power over a teenage girl who had done nothing wrong. The silence of the jet engine had been replaced by the incessant beeping of the cash register, a monotonous soundtrack to her new, diminished reality. This was her life now, a quiet public penance, a daily reminder of the day she underestimated the wrong person and paid the price in full. While the storm of consequences raged around Brenda Walsh, and Apex Air Zola Adebayo was soaring both literally and figuratively. After the initial heart-stopping trauma, the rest of the flight to Geneva was a blur of calm efficiency. A new deferential flight crew, flown in at a moment's notice, treated Zola and her teammates with a respect that bordered on reverence. Harrison, ever the mentor, used the long flight to help them refocus, guiding them through a final review of their presentation and reminding them of what truly mattered: the science. The backpack, her symbol of hope, sat safely buckled into the seat next to her. When they landed in Switzerland, A wave of relief washed over Zola so profound it almost brought her to her knees. She had made it. Project Evergreen had made it. The Global Youth Innovators Summit was an electrifying environment. For 3 days, Zola, Ben, and Maya were immersed in a world of breathtaking ideas. They saw projects ranging from AI-powered crop management systems to new forms of sustainable energy. They were surrounded by their peers, brilliant, passionate young people from every corner of the globe, all united by a desire to build a better future. The incident on the plane, while traumatic, began to feel like a distant, ugly dream from another world. On the final day, it was their turn to present. As Zola walked onto the main stage, a huge auditorium filled with scientists, investors, and policymakers, she felt a flicker of the old fear. But then she looked at the front row, where Mr. Harrison sat, giving her a small, encouraging nod. She looked at Ben and Maya standing by the presentation screen, their faces filled with nervous excitement. And she thought about her backpack, now safely backstage, a silent testament to the journey she had endured. She took a deep breath and began to speak. She didn't just talk about the science of her genetically modified algae. She told the story of Project Evergreen. She spoke of the polluted river near her childhood home, the place that had first sparked her determination. She spoke of the countless hours in the lab, the failures and the breakthroughs. Her passion was infectious, her knowledge undeniable. She painted a vivid picture not just of a problem, but of a tangible, elegant solution. When she finished, there was a moment of stunned silence, followed by an eruption of applause that shook the auditorium. The awards ceremony was held that evening at a gala dinner overlooking Lake Geneva. When the time came to announce the winner of the grand prize, the coveted Global Innovator of the Year award, which came with a substantial research grant and a partnership with a leading environmental technology firm. The tension was palpable. The committee was unanimous in its decision. The presenter, a Nobel laureate in chemistry, announced, "For its scientific ingenuity, its potential for global impact, and the sheer passion of its creators, the 2025 Global Innovator of the Year award goes to Project Evergreen." The world exploded in light and sound. Zola, Ben, and Maya found themselves in a joyous, tearful group hug. They had done it. They had actually done it. Standing at the podium to accept the award, Zola found herself thinking not of Brenda Walsh, but of the countless other young people, especially young girls of color, who are underestimated, dismissed, and told they don't belong in spaces where decisions are made. Her acceptance speech was not what people expected. "Thank you," she said, her voice clear and strong, echoing through the grand hall. "This award isn't just for me or for my team. It's for every young person who has ever been made to feel small, who has had their ideas dismissed, or who has been judged not by the content of their mind, but by the color of their skin or the clothes they wear." She didn't mention the incident on the plane directly, but she didn't have to. The story had by then been widely reported, and many in the audience knew what she had overcome to be standing there. "My project was almost lost on the way here," she continued, her voice unwavering. "It was discarded because someone looked at my backpack and the person carrying it and decided they were worthless. Let this be a lesson. Value is not always wrapped in designer logos. Brilliance is not confined to boardrooms, and the future is in the hands of a generation that will not be discarded. The future is in the backpacks of dreamers everywhere. Don't ever, ever underestimate them." The ovation was thunderous. It was more than just applause for a science project. It was an affirmation of her resilience and her message. In that moment, Zola Adebayo was no longer just a brilliant young scientist. She was a leader. The settlement from Apex Air provided the seed money, and the prize from the summit provided the platform. Project Evergreen was fast-tracked, moving from prototype to pilot program within a year. Zola used her newfound prominence not for fame, but for advocacy, establishing a foundation with Mr. Harrison's guidance to fund and mentor other young, underrepresented innovators. She had faced down prejudice and had not only survived, but thrived. She had transformed an act of ugly dismissal into a global symbol of triumph, proving that the most powerful karma isn't just about punishment for the guilty, but about the soaring, unstoppable success of the wronged. Her journey had started with a dream in a simple black backpack, and it ended with her changing the world. So what's the real takeaway here? It's more than just a story about a flight attendant getting what she deserved. It's a powerful reminder that prejudice is a choice, and it's a choice that can cost you everything. Brenda Walsh didn't just lose her job. She lost her reputation, her financial security, and her place in the world because she chose to see a threat instead of a brilliant young mind. Zola's story proves that resilience and talent are the ultimate answer to ignorance. She faced dismissal and didn't just win an award, she built a platform and started a movement. If this story resonated with you, if you believe in the power of karma and the importance of standing up against prejudice, then please help us share it. Hit that like button, share this video with your friends and family, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel for more true stories that matter. Your support helps us continue to tell these stories. Thank you for watching.